Hello friends, for today's video I'm going to be going through 3 new fantasy releases, those 3 books being The Sword Defiant, House of Roots and Ruin, and Nightbirds. I'll have timestamps in the description bar down below in case you'd like to skip ahead to one specific book or come back to it later and revisit it, but regardless I'm going to jump in with House of Roots and Ruin. This one I'm a little sad because I just did a bunch of fall themed videos. I did one that's just kind of more vague fall themed books, and then some that are creepy and some that are cozy. This would have fit perfectly within that. So if you are somebody who likes to mood read with the season, definitely maybe give this one a look. So the idea is that we follow this young woman who has kind of been kept isolated from the rest of her family, from the rest of society. Her older sister is a parental figure to her, and she is the youngest of many sisters. There is some references to another book called House of Salt and Sorrows, and I'll mention that one in a second, give details because they are somewhat related. But you see the 12 women in the family in the first one, and now we are looking at the youngest daughter from that family grown up. And because of some very odd things that have transpired within this family, the older sister is very protective of our main character. She doesn't want her really going out and about. Our main character doesn't really understand why. And then she has this revelation pretty quickly, and it really flips her entire world upside down, but she still does not like feeling caged. She wants to live her life, and specifically she wants to travel. She wants to explore the world. That's something that's a very deep desire within her, and she has an extreme talent when it comes to doing portraits. And so one of her sisters recommended that she do the portrait of this figure who is a duke's son. It seems like he's going to inherit their estate and all of their wealth, and he seems like a pretty nice guy. The family seems pretty nice, and she has her sister's recommendation, not the older protective sister, but a different sister. So she decides, you know what, I'm going to defy my eldest sister, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to live my life, and I'm going to take this job. Hopefully it'll be the first of many. And when she gets to this estate, things start to pretty quickly reveal themselves to be sinister. There's some odd things transpiring, and our main character is trying to puzzle out if this is something related to her and the discovery that she had at the beginning about herself and why her eldest sister never wants her to leave, or is it something to do with this house? Is it something to do with this family? And that's where you kind of slowly start to discover what's going on. Erin A. Craig has pretty quickly become one of my favorite fantasy horror writers, just because my brand of horror has to be not too scary and not too disturbing, because I'm a big wimp. And if you're like that too, then you probably should check out her works. Small Favors is probably still my favorite, and House of Salt and Sorrows is somewhat related to this. It's interesting because most of the time when you get a sequel, you expect that you have to read the first one, but this one you technically could jump in with this second book. I'm not sure if the author always intended for there to be multiple books in this series. For a long time, House of Salt and Sorrows was considered a standalone, so I don't know if she sort of had this idea to come back and revisit this family and then specifically zero in on this one the youngest of all of the sisters, or if it was something that she had. I don't know if she had it planned along the way or not. But regardless, the first one, definitely still worth picking up. I think that it's a little bit tropier, and I definitely think that it actually is scarier than this one was, but I still greatly enjoyed it. The reason you don't have to pick it up though is because so much time has transpired from the events of the first one to this one. You follow a different one of the sisters, and her story is pretty separate from what was going on in the first book. In fact, she doesn't really remember a lot of what happened in the first book because she was very, very young. So she's kind of just like the creepy kid in the first one, and then now she's an adult, and she's like, wait a second, why was I so creepy, basically? And you find that out alongside her. So I mean, you can start with this one or you can read the first one. Both, I think, are worth picking up if you are a fan of not too scary fantasy horror. I do think, though, that this one is the least frightening that I have read from this author, and it's more disturbing, I would say. The sinister things, the atmosphere, it's all done well, but I was never scared. The first one, House of Salt and Sorrows, there were parts that I legitimately found creepy. I think that Small Favors did such a good job of little pieces here and there and you have no idea what's going on and it starts to get kind of scary. This one, the disturbing things are things that our character is somewhat interacting with, and it takes the fear out of it. There are still a few scenes in the book that were fantastically done. They were very visual. I could picture everything that was happening, and it definitely had that, you know, the fear crawling down your spine sort of feeling. But I don't think it was that scary. I think it was more about how disturbing everything got to be. I definitely would say, though, that if you do pick this one up, just be ready for what I'm assuming there's going to be a third book. So the first one, House of Salt and Sorrows, can be read like a standalone because it ends pretty conclusively. This one, I'm expecting a third book, and when there is a third book, I will no longer be able to say, you don't have to read the other one. It feels like it's going to go from the first book being almost standalone-esque to the next two almost duology-esque. Anyway, great fall read, definitely would recommend, and also just her books in general. I think they're a lot of fun. After that, we have The Sword Defiant. This is an adult fantasy story that has all of the ingredients you would typically find in fantasy. It's got elves, it's got dwarves, it's got vampires, it's got necromancers, it's got pretty much every old school thing about fantasy that you can think of. It's all there in this world. So in some ways, you would think it would be cliche, been there, done that, but what I think this author did really well is they definitely are paying their respects to fantasy as a whole, the genre, and the books that have come before, while also, I think, simultaneously being somewhat critical of certain types of stories, the hero's journey. The idea is that you follow this man who, back in the day, him and his merry band of misfits, everybody was the stereotypes that you would find, like there's the paladin and he's honorable, and then there's this character who's kind of like the I'm just a nobody poor farmer, and then you have the dwarf who's like loves his axe, and you've got the princess who's an elf. You've got all the stereotypes. They all defeated the Dark Lord, and now we are looking at a long time later. Everybody has pretty much dispersed. They all thought, like, we conquered the enemy, we did it, so everything should be great, right? And in some ways, this feeling of I have no purpose is almost harder to sit with than when there was an enemy to defeat. And so it's very much looking at the after. And our main character is not our only perspective. You also get his sister, which I wasn't expecting at all. I thought if we were going to get another perspective, it would be one of the other individuals that he defeated the Dark Lord alongside. But having his sister be a perspective definitely, I think, humanized the story in a way, because we're starting to look at the smaller scale. What about the people that got left behind? Okay, so he's a hero, but what about, I mean, he came from humble beginnings, so let's look at those humble beginnings, and you kind of look at it through his sister's perspective. They don't really intertwine much beyond that she's on a quest to find her son, who has decided he wants to find adventure just like his uncle had, and she's like, my son's not ready for this world, it's too dark, it's too cruel, I have to go find him. And then you're looking at Sir Lammergeier is the main perspective, and you're just seeing him pretty certain that something is coming back, something to do with the Dark Lord or maybe a new threat, and he's trying to gather people back together. He's trying to warn them, but nobody seems to be taking him all that seriously, and so he feels very much alone. He seems very depressed, to be honest. And I really thought the way that both perspectives were done, the way that you examine the trauma that is put on these characters after what has occurred with these heroes' journeys, I thought all of that was done exceptionally well. I do think, though, due to the fact that you have so many of the fantasy cliches, that I was expecting this to be a lot more adventurous and fun, and it's really not. It's pretty slow going. There are action scenes, there are definitely cool moments, and the fight scenes are very engaging, but if you're looking to go into this expecting it to be like Kings of the Wild, that's really not what this is. It's much more slow and reflective. I also thought that even though so many of the different races and the different character types felt so familiar, I also thought the author did a very good job making these characters feel distinct and making them feel like real people, and not having the fact that they fit within a certain mold bring them down and have them be to the point where you're like, okay, so just fill in the blank, this is just like this character from this story. They really weren't. They very much felt like their own characters. There's also some pretty great twists and turns toward the end. Things get really explosive and really intense, so the stakes definitely get raised a lot. And then the other thing I'll mention in this book that I think a lot of people are going to really like is the sentient sword. I know that a lot of people really love that in Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson, and imagine if the sword in Warbreaker was much crueler. And even though both are like, let's go kill some stuff, I feel like the one in Warbreaker, there's like a pureness to them where they're like, let's go defeat evil. And this one's like, I am evil and I want things to die. And our main character is tasked with guarding the sword because it can grant the wielder a lot of power. And so he has to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands, but it also can pretty much read his thoughts. And it's almost like all of his deepest, darkest feelings, it's like the sword is the physical representation of that. It forces him to confront those things because it kind of takes those thoughts and then it feeds into it. It's like, well, we should go kill stuff. We should go out and slaughter a bunch of enemies. And he's like, stop it. So it is kind of, I don't want to say a fun dynamic, but it was something that I think kind of filled in the gaps. We could have easily just followed this man around and everything been really slow, but by having this constant exchange with this sword, I think it definitely brought out our main character's personality. And also, I just thought the sword itself had a lot of personality. Also, want to say, the audiobook is fantastic. The sword voice is very good. A lot of the different accents and everything like that in the book they were all great. So would definitely recommend this one also. Just know it's a little bit slower going. Might take a while to get through. If I had one criticism, it would be that I think sometimes it was a little extra slow. I think there were some parts we could have cut. And I think we could have prepped some of the big plot things a little bit better. But still, I don't really feel like this was necessarily plot driven. It almost felt like it was just driven by the characters' inner monologues, and not that you get them on page, but it was like the reflection of the character and the growth of the character was sort of what propelled everything forward. Anyway, the last book for today would be Nightbirds. This one is very different from the previous two I was just talking about. This one follows 3 young women who have an ability where if they kiss another person, they can give that person some of their magical powers. This is currently basically outlawed within their society, as in the past, a lot of women who had power were stamped out because people feared them. They felt it was too dangerous to have this magic running through a bunch of people. They didn't think it was good for society, and so you really only have a few people here and there that seem to have these powers. And these women typically are found within high society, and there's payments that are made to the women that supervise them. Those women get paid, and then this allows for random people to come in and have this kiss given to them and having some powers temporarily. And these people are vetted. They like look into their past and what house they come from and things like that. And even though it's definitely illegal, they still are all fine with it because they're like, we're all from wealthy houses and we're all really rich, and we're just going to turn a blind eye to this because we kind of want the perks that come with these magical abilities. And these women have to kind of question whether or not they like this about their life. How willing are they really when it feels like there's somebody pulling the strings for them at all times? Do they have much freedom? And what I was not expecting that I really liked about the story is that not all the girls are from the same place or from the same socioeconomic status, you could say. So one of them is from another place that feels differently about magic, and they used to really value magic. They're much more in tune with like the earth and the sea. And this character, she questions like, do I lead people astray when I give them my magic? Is my magic actually corrupt? Do I believe all of the teachings that were passed down that our magic shouldn't be used? Am I corrupt? Have I corrupted magic? And so the questioning on her end was very different from the other two. The other two, one of them loves this, and she feels like it grants her so much freedom and empowerment, and she's like, who cares if I have to kiss people every now and then? I love my life. And then the third one is someone who comes from the lower classes, but through some connections that her mother had with some of the upper classes, she's able to have this position, but she still remembers what it was like to struggle and barely get by, and so she doesn't really like the second one I mentioned, who loves her fancy, beautiful, wealthy life. She's like, do you not realize how much you turn a blind eye to what goes on in the rest of the world? So the characters, they definitely challenge one another, and then as the story progresses, they're starting to discover more about this unseen threat that they didn't really know about, that maybe some of the people that want magic stamped out are doing a lot more to stamp it out than they realize, and maybe all the protection that their wealth brought them, maybe it's not as strong as they thought. So I really liked the direction the book went in. It starts to get a little bit more political, which I was definitely very excited about. I think the second one will probably be even more political than the first. My only thing, and this is a personal preference, all the characters had distinct personalities, but I didn't necessarily feel like I felt their personalities whenever we would shift to their perspective. So it's third person, it's not first person. And it's a stylistic thing where you can make the tone change slightly in the narration to fit whichever perspective you're with. And I wish that maybe we'd utilize that a little bit more, because we do not only see these three characters, but we do kind of start to branch out and look at more of what's going on within the city, more of what's going on with the magic and other characters. And so I think it would have added that little extra bit of distinction between each character and feeling a little bit more connected to them. I liked all of them though. I liked the story. I am interested in the second one, and it kind of, the whole time I don't know, I just wasn't sure where it was going to go, but I always liked the direction it went in. So I liked this one also. It's always fun when all of the new releases are ones that I liked quite a bit. If you've read any of these, definitely let me know your thoughts on them. Just to be clear, this one and Nightbirds are both considered young adult, and this one is considered adult. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day. If you plan on picking any of these up, let me know, and I'll see you all later. Bye.